Hello everyone and welcome to another game from the UzChess Cup, the Challenger section. I know I mentioned in the previous video that that will probably be my last game of the UzChess Cup, but since so many of you requested this one and I finally checked it out, I definitely agree we have to show this one. So Vasyl Ivanchuk, the legend himself, faces I think 33 or 34-year-old Chinese Grandmaster Kun Ma, who's obviously very strong as he's playing here. He's 26-30. He represented China in many events. I've seen in one event in 2014 in Asian Cup, he went undefeated with 7 out of 7 on board 4. I believe he's 2019 Chinese champion. So again, a very strong player, has a very interesting style. And obviously, it's a very strong matchup. And he had a great tournament. He could have placed much higher, but he lost to the winner of the challengers, to Nicolas Teodoru, in the final round that we've mentioned. But this game, it's definitely something else. And when watching games like these, you can just throw the engine right out the window. So it just does not apply here, and it doesn't matter. If the engine says +5, +30, plus mate in 17, yeah, that's not happening. So let's see what I mean by this. Vasyl with white opens with pawn to f4. The bird's opening. We have pawn to d5 and knight to f3. We have bishop to g4 attacking the knight and pawn to e3, followed by knight to f6. We have pawn to h3 and Kun Ma immediately exchanges the bishop for knight, captures, and pawn to e6. So it's a very natural way of developing. You give up the light square bishop so you can put your pawns on light squares, and you have a dark square bishop that can roam in between them. On the downside, you no longer have a bishop pair, and the Vasyl does. So if he can make them fully operational, that's going to go a long way. We have pawn to d3, knight to c6, and now there are a couple of games that reach this position, but here we have pawn to g4 by Vasyl, and it is now already, as of move 7, that we have a completely new game. And if you saw this, you'd be like, yes, white is obviously, someone's uncle, not developing any pieces, playing with the queen, pushing g4, f4. Yes, we're dealing with a 1600 player here, but no, we're not. So g4, and you could counter it in many ways. You could counter with h5, sort of provoke g5, then knight goes to d7. You could just strike in the center with d4, also just try and mess up Chucky's strong center. But Kun Ma goes knight to b4, going after the c2 pawn. Okay, rook h2, stopping knight captures on c2. We have pawn to c5. Pawn to e4. You could also advance the pawn to g5, but I guess it's one of those positions where if your opponent allows it, you don't want to play it. You're like, yeah, I can find another useful move. So Vasyl plays pawn to e4 and pawn to h6. Now stopping pawn to g5, knight a3, preparing pawn to c3 to kick away the knight, and then you're gonna remaneuver the knight to c2, then maybe to e3, and then, well, whatever black plays. Bishop to e7, we have bishop to d2 and pawn to a6. We have pawn to c3, finally kicking away the knight, knight to c6 and knight to c2. And he doesn't like Vasyl's knight coming to e3, so pawn to d4. We have castles queenside by Vasyl, pawn to e5 now. Black can be very happy now as the pawns have been pushed without weakening the position at all. Pawn to g5. We have knight to d7, and now g captures on h6, rook captures on h6, and now rook to g2. The problem with f captures on e5, if you're wondering about that, is that the knight will simply capture, attack the queen, and once the queen moves, you're just going to move the rook. Free tempi for black, not the best. So instead, after rook captures on h6, Vasyl goes rook to g2, attacks the g7 pawn, and bishop to f6. Nicely defending, and also if the position clears up in the center at some point, that bishop will be nicely eyeing the white king. So pawn to f5, Vasyl closes the center. We have rook to h7, as now the rook is attacked as well, so rook to h7, and pawn to c4, fully closing the center. And what does Ma Kun do? Well, he opens it up. Pawn to b4. Okay, we have king to b1, knight to b6, and now king to a1 even. The king will be safer there if the a file opens up. If the b file opens up, we have knight to c8 and knight to a3, putting pressure on b5, knight to d7 defending, and rook to c1. Okay, we have queen to b6, and now bishop to e1. And here you could open up the position right away, but it doesn't really do all that much. Before closing the position, maybe you can kick away the knight and then advance the a-pawn. That's going to be a lot of moves. And if you just trade, for example, captures, the knight can capture. If you capture, rook will capture. And yes, you do have the semi-open b file, but you're not going to do anything there. A rook can defend, a rook can attack the b2 pawn, but you're already defending it. So, you know, you don't mind. You're going to put pressure on the c pawn, and not a problem in the world for white here. So after bishop to e1, king to d7 was played. And now rook to g4, just controlling more space, now controlling h4 as well, not allowing any bishop to h4 tricks, because the bishop, while you know, can be a very scary piece, this one on f6 is for the moment but a pawn. We have rook a to h8, putting pressure on the h3 pawn, although just winning the h4 square, I believe. And now queen to d1. So the queen can be remaneuvered over to the queen side if a capture on c4 occurs, but a capture does not occur. We have pawn to b4, knight to b1, and now rook to h5. Again, just winning some squares, and now bishop can come to g5, and also you can now start advancing that a pawn. We have knight to d2 and bishop to g5 as planned, so that bishop finally ceases to exist as a pawn. We have rook to b1 unpinning from the bishop, and knight to e8, just nicely remaneuvering. Knight to f3 attacking the bishop, and bishop to f4. So it's a very nice piece, nicely defended here, and well, it's just a nuisance to say the least. We have pawn to h4, stopping any pawn to g5 action, and king to e7. We have bishop to h3, and king to f8. All of a sudden, black has castled king side, so it's a very, very weird game. We have queen to e2, bishop to e3. Rook to g2, and bishop back to f4, and now we have bishop to f2. Here, Vasyl sort of makes a mistake because he's less than a minute on the clock. But this game, most of the game was played where both players are below a minute on the clock. But here you should really consider b3 as, yes, pushing the a-pawn, while it does sound very scary, it doesn't do all that much. For example, bishop g3, and if black is persistent, pawn to a4, you will simply play bishop g4, and really no problems there. You can move the rook, then you can capture on f4, for example, captures, you can capture on a4, and you have no problems here. The queen and rook nicely guarded second rank, b3 is nicely covered, you can never push that pawn. So, not much for black here. So after bishop to f4, we have bishop to f2, and now b3 for black. It's not much, but it's something. So Kun Ma goes pawn to b3, we have pawn to a3, and now knight to b4. And without this move, you basically agree to a draw. Knight to b4 is a move that, because you will have this knight to c2, if white doesn't do something, you're going to have to give up the queen. The pawn covers the a2 square. So this is what allows black to at least try and push for something. And if you capture the knight, of course, that's we don't even have to comment on that. You're just going to get checkmated. It doesn't even matter if you move the rook 1, because now just a nice check, and this will be checkmated with the bishop covering c1 and the pawn covering c2. So after knight to b4, rook to h1 immediately, so knight to c2 will not cost you a queen, but still knight to c2 with check, king to b1, and now rook 5 to h6. Okay, we have bishop to g3, offering a trade of bishops. Bishop captures, rook captures, and queen to c7. We have rook h to g1 and queen to e7. So, okay, what is there anything for Vasyl to do, and is there anything for Kun Ma to do? We have queen to d2, and queen to c7, just nicely repeating. We have rook to g5, again just winning more space. You're done, you're below a minute on the clock, so if you can make a useful move like rook g5, you should definitely make it, even though the engine sort of deems it an inaccuracy. But yeah, I mean, like I said, this game we're not gonna focus much on what the engine says. We have knight to e3, queen to h2, now putting pressure on the e5 pawn, and now just pawn to a5, saying, okay, you can capture on e5 if you want. Queen g3, and here if you capture, for example, knight captures on e5, you give up the h4 pawn. So it's not the best. Again, if queen captures, the knight will have to move, same thing. But after queen to g3, you are putting a triple pressure on that g7 pawn. So here pawn to a4, and now Vasyl plays rook captures on g7. Here there actually was the option of going knight captures on e5 because well, f6, for example, doesn't work. You're just going to play knight to g6 with check, and you're going to pick up the rook here. If you capture with this rook, then this rook captures, and of course, first you trade queens, and then you're just going to be up in exchange. And if you go rook captures on h4 here, then rook captures on g7 is a completely different story with the knight already on e5. Now there's really not much for black to do here. For example, captures, and now you go in knight g6 check, and you pick up the queen on c7. So very, very tactical stuff, but minute on the clock, you have to make concessions. So Vasyl went for rook captures on g7 right away. Knight captures, queen captures on g7, king to e8, and now knight captures on e5, and it looks very similar, but it's not. However, Kunma does not go for the best possible move. He has to go after the queen. He played queen to e7, and now Vasyl just goes back. Knight to f3. We have pawn to f6, offering a queen trade. Queen back to g3. King to d7, now trying to castle queen side, I guess. And here, pawn to e5, which is a good move, only you have to prepare it. I'm just going to show quickly how to prepare it. It was best to prepare it with queen to a1. And now you're threatening to bring the queen over to the queen side and harass the black king. And then only if the queen moves from the e file, then you strike with pawn to e5. And if something like rook to a8, to stop queen coming to a5, okay, then you go rook to g6 and you start creating more pressure. For example, a nice tricky line could be after rook to g6, you go rook to h8. Of course, you don't want to open up this diagonal, but now e5, and now this diagonal is opening up, and that's it. Not much for black to do here. But after king d7, Vasyl played pawn to e5 right away, which looks like it's the exact same thing, but king c6. And doesn't really do all that much. Capturing on f6, just queen captures, nothing really happens. So Vasyl decides to play pawn to e6. Like I said, a minute on the clock, and you have a passed pawn on e6. So, let your opponent burn time trying to figure out what's what here. Okay, pawn to e6, we have queen to c7, offering a queen trade, and now queen back to e1. King to b6, stopping queen to a5, and now knight captures on d4. Here, it's hard to figure out what to play. Something like queen g3, you could offer a queen trade and try and, play on that strength that is the e6 pawn, or you could, try something. But Vasyl goes for knight captures on d4. He says, I already have a passed e-pawn. I'm going to grab all of your pawns, and then I'm going to, push them. So that is the idea here. C captures on d4, immediately making a mistake. Here, Vasyl sort of miscalculated, but like I said, a minute on the clock for both of them. There's actually this very nice rook h4. And that's just it. The bishop is hanging. The rook can now capture the knight, so you don't give up the b4 square to the queen. And that's it. If knight b5 going after the queen, you can just play queen e5. And black's position is just not just great, but also it is objectively winning. There's no move here for why did that, would make sense. But yeah, difficult, in the heat of the moment, you're constantly playing with a minute on the clock to, just, cool your head and make a move like that. So C captures on d4 was played, inviting Vasyl's queen in, queen to b4 with check, king to a7, and queen captures on a4 with check. King to b8, Vasyl captures, first gives a check on b4, queen b4 check, king to c8, and now bishop to g2. Inviting knight captures on g2, because if you don't, that bishop, is just a monster. So knight captures on g4, rook captures, and queen to b7, attacking the queen and the rook. And this is basically why you capture it, because you can force an endgame here. But not just yet. Queen c5 check, king to b8, and now rook to g1, of course avoiding the trade. Rook captures on h4, it will cost you some pawns. Rook to c1, preparing to start pushing that past c-pawn, but now rook to h1. With the pawn on b3, it is very, very uncomfortable for the white king there on b1. So here we have queen captures on d4, saying, okay, you can start a king hunt, I will try to escape somehow. Okay, rook captures on c1 check, king captures on c1, and the rook to h1 with check. King d2, rook h2 check, king to e3, and now queen to c7. And what can you do? Well, look at the position. Kunma is just up a full rook, but Vasyl does have 3 pawns for the rook, or rather 4 pawns for the rook. Most of them will fall, but it's all that matters is that one doesn't. So let's see what happens. Queen captures on f6, grabbing yet another pawn, saying, okay, you do not have a forced checkmate, but let's see what happens. Queen g3 check. King to d4, we have queen to d6 with check, king c3, and rook to c2 with check. King captures on b3, and now queen captures on d3 with check. King to a4, and rook captures on c4 with check. And it seems like white should just resign. You're getting checkmated in a couple of moves. But Vasyl plays pawn to b4, and now it's not so clear. It's actually a forced checkmate in 12, but little time on the clock. Queen to d1 check. Kunma finds the best continuation. King to a5. We have queen to d5 with check. King to a4, and now queen to c6 with check. Well, not a bad move. The instant knockout is actually rook to c7, a move that doesn't really come to mind, but it makes perfect sense. You will use the rook, of course, to block checks from the white queen. You still have control over b3, and now whatever white does, let's say queen f8 checking to b7 and d7, trying to get another queen into the game, you can easily end the game with queen to c6 check. And now you either go king a5 and queen to a6 will be checkmate, or the king goes down the board and then queen to c2 will be checkmate. But yeah, mating pictures are not easy when you have this little time on the clock. So he tried queen to c6 check, king to a5, and now he completely aborts the checkmating attack. He goes rook to e4, and he says, all right, I'm going to take care of the passed pawns first, and then I'm going to checkmate the white king. Which again is still winning for him, but he will have many more chances to make a mistake. So queen to f8 by Chucky, king to b7, and queen to f7 with check, queen to c7 with check, blocking check, and Vasyl trades queens, captures, and king to a6. Now he just wants to advance his passed pawn to victory, and now it's rook versus 4 pawns. So can the rook eliminate all of them? Yes, but in actual play, not so easy to do. We have rook e5, pawn to a4. We have rook captures on f5, king to a7. And you know that if this pawn touches b5, then this is just happening. So rook to e5, pawn to b5, and rook captures on e6. Okay, you have control over b6, so it's not happening just yet. But Vasyl plays pawn to a5, and he says b6 is coming. And it's still winning, but this is one of those winning positions that belong, in tactics books, because there's only one move that wins here. And again, it's far from the first one that comes to mind. So feel free to pause the video and see if you would have beaten Vasyl Ivanchuk in this position, having little time on the clock. Well, I give you a couple of seconds. You can even take 2 minutes if you want. So the only move that wins, believe it or not, is rook e7. And yes, I mean, you're not finding that over the board. It's just disgusting. Point is that you perfectly position the rook. So when you are checked by pawn to b6, you remove the king with check. And now after b6 check, a6 also doesn't help. Any king move doesn't help. But this is the best continuation for white. And now after king c6 coming with check, you cannot block with this because the rook will just capture. And after king to b8, you will just waste a move. Rook h7, let's say king to a8. Now you go rook to h5, you go after the pawn, and that's it. It doesn't matter what you do. Pawn to b7, rook captures on a5, or you don't do that. You could also play pawn to a6, but then king captures on b6, followed by a nice checkmate here. So you can't do that. You will have to play b7, and then rook captures on a5 with check, and after king to b8, rook b5, and that's it. You're going to capture this pawn. Of course, if king a8, you don't capture that stalemate, you just force the king down the board, and that's it. And now you either queen the pawn, and then rook captures with check, or you move the king, and then rook a5 is checkmate. So that's the way to do it. But after a5, Kunma played king to c8, and now it's no longer winning. Now Vasyl plays pawn to b6, and look at this. Rook e7 check, Similar, but not quite the same. We have king to a8, and now rook to b7. Other moves don't really help. a6 is just coming. So rook to b7 was played, pawn to a6 attacking the rook, and now rook captures on b6, and now pawn to a7. And the problem here is that both the rook and the king control the two squares that the white king can use to get out of stalemate. So it doesn't matter. You move the rook, the king, the rook stalemates the white king. You move the rook anywhere, the king stalemates the white king. So for fun, Kunma just played rook to b7, and he was in this position on move 87 that the players didn't agree to a draw. It's a draw by default now. So yeah, crazy game. Could have gone either way. Vasyl had some brilliant ideas. Kunma played a brilliant game. He was winning for the better part of the game. But yeah, I mean, in a position like that, you have a rook versus 4 pawns. You know that it's winning. You always know that it's winning. But yeah, one move like that, I mean, if you don't see after pawn to a5, if you don't see rook e7 here, it's just not winning. So yeah, crazy stuff there. Beautiful game by both of them, and yeah, really hope you guys enjoyed it. And while I was looking for a photo of Kunma, I also found an article regarding one of his games. He lost the shortest game between two grandmasters. I think it was in 2014. So I'm just going to show you the moves because it's a really interesting position. Kunma had the white pieces here, and it's only 10 moves. And he was playing against Grandmaster Danny Raznikov, and this is the position. So it was in English, and okay, just captures, something like g3. So, standard English, queen to b6, knight b3. And here comes this very interesting knight to e5 move. And okay, you might be thinking, well, what do we do now? Pawn to e4. So why not? We're defending everything. There's no problem here. All of a sudden, his opponent played knight f to g4, and you're lost. Whatever you do, you're just lost. Checkmate is being threatened, so he stopped it by playing pawn to c5. Obviously, the queen now has to move, but here just queen captures on b3 was played, and Kunma resigned the game as there is nothing more to be done here. So just 10 moves, shortest game between two grandmasters, shortest classical game. Of course, there are probably shorter bullet games online. Point is that if you capture the queen, now there's a knight f3 check, and if you go to e2, then knight d4 check picks up the queen. So you cannot go to d2. To e2, you're going to have to go to d1. But now knight captures on f2, first forking the king and the rook. And again, if you go to e2, you get forked on d4. You cannot go here. You cannot go here. And if you go here, it's the exact same fork. Fork the king and the queen, and you cannot keep defending the queen. So you're just going to have to move it and lose the queen. If you go here, then it comes with check, and you even lose the rook. So yeah, it was a pretty crazy game, and probably would have never seen it. But yeah, I was looking for a photo, and then I found the queen captures on b3. Just a very nice move by Raznikov. So yeah, that's the game and a little bit of extra. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you again for recommending such a wonderful game. Both of them played incredibly, and really hope you guys enjoyed it. If you haven't seen the previous video, also do check it out. Brilliant stuff by Chucky, as usual. I would like to thank Seshadri Subramanian, Andrei Shrade, Johan Kron, James Anderson, and Guillermo Ismael Garcia Borges for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.